Hi there. Let me introduce you to the new SPL Passeq analog code plugin. An exact emulation of SPL's famous hardware Passeq EQ, this plugin is quite possibly the best and most powerful software EQ you will find anywhere today. The first thing that becomes obvious is the rather unusual look of the plugin. But don't let looks deceive you. It is actually quite logical and easy to operate. Just don't see the arrangement of the controls in a circular, but rather in a stellar way or in blocks of low, mid, and high. The plugin operates in double mono and can also be applied to single mono channels where one side simply stays inactive. You can also link both sections so both are exactly alike. Each channel has two sections, a boost and a cut section. Each section has 3 bands, one each for the low, mid, and high frequencies. In the middle of each channel is a big output control that serves as an output level regulator. You can save 4 individual sets of settings per plugin instance and turn each channel off and on individually. You can also switch the Passeq into the MS mode, which enables you to process the mid information with the left channel and the side information with the right channel. As a neoclassical passive EQ, the Passeq stands as one of the newest members in a long row of trusted and historical equalizers like the Pulteqs from the 50s and 60s. But whereas the old models only offered a limited amount of frequency bands with only a few switchable frequencies, in contrast to them, the Passeq comes with a massive 144 frequencies, that's 72 per channel, which gives you all the power you need to do whatever you want with an EQ. The boost and cut frequencies are not identical as to give you the broadest choice for very elaborate EQ curves. All bands have a different layout that is optimized for that specific range. The low frequency bands have a shelving characteristic, the mid bands a peak characteristic, and the high bands have 2 different characteristics. The cut band comes as a shelf. The boost band features a peak filter with a variable Q, which is justified by the different sonic characteristics that individually designed and constructed coil condenser resistors usually have. The boost of the high frequencies is directly related to the Q of a band. A narrow Q will result in an increased boost. A wide Q will decrease the boost. As a result, the wave energy below the bell curve remains essentially the same and thus will not alter the amount of perceived high frequencies in the overall frequency spectrum when one meddles with the Q. That makes it much easier to work with the high frequency boost. To give you an example, let's have a look at the low frequency bands. Let's say you set the frequency of the boost side to 120 Hz and you boost it about 9 dB. That will result in all frequencies below 120 Hz being boosted. You can easily narrow your curve by setting the low cut frequency to 60 Hz, for example, and then cut it by around 9 dB, which will bring all frequencies below 60 Hz back to 0 dB, or cut it even further and make the curve really steep. It's really quite simple in the end. Whereas most people will probably judge the Passeq to be a mastering EQ, in reality, there is no real limitation to any one particular kind of application, purpose, or instrument. The Passeq plugin uses so little of your precious CPU power that you can generously apply it to any channel you want. So let's get right down to business and have a look at the Passeq in action. For this example, I have applied the Passeq to the master track of a mix to show you how broad the range of the Passeq is. So, before I go into showing you how the Passeq actually works, let me tell you a little bit about the configuration of the session that I'm working on. The session that I'm going to be using for this example is a mix that I have recently done, and this is not mastered or pre-mastered whatsoever, so the Passeq is the only plugin that is on the master channel. There is no other equalizer on it, no compressor, so all you hear is the pure manipulation of the sound of the Passeq as we work with it. So what you see in the background here is the session and the edit window with the Passeq in the master channel, and it's been clipping a bit, so I'm going to unclip that and let's go into working. Before we do, I would like to explain to you something very important about the link button. The link button, as I told you before, links channel 1 and 2, so that when it's activated, when you turn a certain control in the first channel, the corresponding control in the second channel does exactly the same. So when I, for instance, move the control of the mid-frequency boost in channel 1, it does exactly the same on channel 2, as you can see. Now this goes for every control in the entire channel system. It goes for high, low, everything. Now, when I turn the link button off and disconnect both channels, and then I turn a certain control, only the control in that channel is affected. As you can see, as I have moved the high boost channel on the left side, on the right side, nothing happened. Now, when I turn the link button back on, those two controls that I've just put into different positions are not linked again. They don't automatically move into the same position. And this is a very useful feature, as sometimes when you're mastering or when you're mixing a stereo track, you don't want that. You want one of the two channels sound a little different from the other one. And if you only want this for one of the controls, you can unlink it and then change the settings of one of them and then link it back again. And all the other controls are linked, as you can see here, in the low frequencies. And only when I actually touch the control of the two channels that I have separated, the one control that I haven't touched is going to jump back into sync with the one that I have touched. Very useful and very important to know. Now let's set all the values back to 0 or into the default position. You can do that by pressing Alt and then clicking on the control. And let's have a listen to the session that I've been working on. Now please remember, this is no master, this is strictly the mix. Now, a lot of people, me included, and most certainly most mastering guys, would probably feel that the kick drum is not punching enough. I'm not going to go into the exact settings of a perfect kick drum now, but I want to show you how effective and wonderful the Passeq actually sounds. And in order to do that, I'm going to set the low frequency boost channel to about 180 hertz. And then I'm going to carefully start boosting the low frequencies. And as you may remember from the beginning of this video, the low cut, the low boost, and the high boost function as shelves. So when I push the low boost at around 180 hertz, all the frequencies below 180 are getting pushed.
Put our friendship to the test, lay our differences to rest, and leave it all.
Now, of course, bass adds a lot of power, so the channel goes into the red. We'll deal with that later. Now, of course, it sounds a bit muddy because the low boost pushes all the frequencies even down to 10 hertz. So I'm going to go to the low cut. I'm going to set that to about 60. And then I cut that to bring all the frequencies below 60 back to the original level, or even below that. Let's go to 12. Let's make it a steep curve. Take some of that very low bass away. Now, if I want to compare the before and after, I just quickly press on one of the on and off buttons, and since the both channels are linked, both turn on and off. Now, if I wanted to keep that setting, but I see it's clipping in the red in the channel, I can go to the master volume control of both channels, and they're linked, and I just bring the volume a bit down until it stopped clipping. Now, the next thing I want to do is add some highs. To do that, I'm going to start the song all over again. High frequencies, of course, are very important for vocals, guitars, keyboards, strings that have to sit on top of the mix in order to make the mix grand and shiny. Now, let us remember that the high frequency boost channel is the only channel that features a Q control. Now, many people sometimes don't know what the Q control is, what it does, and what the numbers mean. And it's very easy to remember. It's a very simple rule of thumb. The Q control defines how narrow or how wide the frequency curve is under which the equalizer comes into effect. The letter Q is derived from quality, which means that the higher the number is, the narrower the frequency band is. This comes from a time when lower quality equalizers were very inexact with the frequencies that they had to deal with. So, rule of thumb, a low Q is a very wide frequency range, a very high number in the Q is a very narrow frequency range. So again, if I bring the Q up, the band of the frequency is getting extremely narrow, whereas if I bring it all the way down, the equalizer almost reacts like a shelf. So with that shelf, if we then select a frequency of around 12K, meaning that everything above 12K is being pushed, and if we then start the song again, and we now boost those frequencies, you should immediately hear how all the high frequencies in the mix start to come out. But as I mentioned earlier, at that Q width, when you boost the curve, it doesn't go very high. The same energy that will be applied to a very narrow band if the Q was very high is now being applied to a very broad range of frequencies. Now let's bring the boost all the way back down, keep it at 12K, and now narrow the Q all the way. So now only the frequencies at around 12K plus or minus a bit are affected. So if we now start the song again and we start pushing that, you should immediately hear a very different result.
Girl, have it your way, and I won't say nothing more. I try to give you a good.
Well, let me turn the Passeq off and on again so you can compare.
I'll tell you twice, but it seems you're all too sure, and the story comes undone, and the plot begins.
In comparison, without the equalizer, it sounds really far away and dull now.
Game you blame.
But with it on, you have a wonderful voice that cuts through the mix, since the frequencies that are brought out also belong to other instruments. Even if you bring the boost and the cut of the low frequencies all the way down.
Put our friendship to the test, lay our differences to rest, and leave it all behind. 'Cause when
The Passeq sounds very open and gives the mix a lot of air and high frequencies that are soft and don't pierce. It also is able to produce very warm and solid low frequencies that support the mix from underneath. Now, of course, this doesn't only apply to full mixes. You can put the Passeq on vocals alone, on guitars, on bass guitars, on drums, on anything you want, and benefit from the wonderful qualities that the Passeq has.
and it breaks
Why don't you find it out for yourself under www.spl.info, where you can download the Passeq and its manual, you can install it on your computer and test it for 14 days without any restrictions or limitations. There you can see what the Passeq can do for you and your music. Now, if you found any cool tricks or applications with the Passeq yourself, feel free to tape a video and upload it as an answer to this video to share with the rest of us what you have discovered.
we've been there waiting.
Until then, we wish you lots of fun experimenting and playing around with the Passeq and other plugins from SPL. May the muse kiss ya. And until next time, bye-bye.